Today I'm introducing Mackenzie Browning, who is originally from Eastern Ontario, where he received his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with honors from Queen's University. Mackenzie is primarily a printmaker and sculptor and is currently enrolled in the Master of Fine Arts program here at the University of Saskatchewan. Mackenzie is interested in exploring the landscape of his own personal history in relation to ideas of place and home. He is interested in breaking down the past constructions that he was raised in and reevaluating these ideas in his present time and location.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming out. So I titled my talk, The Rejected Opposite. I guess that my idea behind that was mostly surrounding the suburb. Its rejected opposite would be the city. So specifically where I grew up, the city would be Toronto, so it was kind of deemed as dirty and unsafe and not a really great place to raise children. So I think that was kind of the context for which I grew up in. This picture here, it's actually, well, my partner he moved to Denver not too long ago, but I've been taking some aerial photography of some of the suburbs, and this one really struck me as none of the lawns actually like touched each other or touched the homes, which is interesting. It's quite sterile. Okay. So I thought for the talk that I would try to give you a little bit of background and maybe show you a little bit of how I view things or how I approach my art practice. So I've moved quite a bit in my life, not really by my choice, but this place here is the farm that I grew up on in Hampton, Ontario. So it was 100 acres. It was a sheep farm. My dad actually founded it in 1980. I don't know what kind of farm it was prior to that, but it was kind of funny because my father actually grew up in Toronto, but he became kind of a hippie. He wanted to get back to earth or back to the land. So we decided that he would buy a farm and become a shepherd. Anyways, that lasted, well, I lived there for 9 years of my life. And then I moved to Whitby, Ontario, which isn't too far from there, in this kind of, well, it was a brand new home at the time. My parents were together, but it was a huge adjustment, just even in land size. When you grow up on a farm, you're kind of taught a certain work ethic, and all of this work becomes a hobby of sorts. It becomes a need. So, anyways, we tried to heavily control this land. There wasn't a lot of it, but landscaping, design, everything on the inside. So I lived there for a couple of years, and my parents actually divorced and moved to a few different places. So these are the other subdivisions, and they're all on the eastern side of Toronto. So here's some more. So this upper right-hand corner is actually an older subdivision that we lived in, and it's the one that my family refers to the most and wishes that they never sold or flipped. You can see it has like the most common space, a lot of green space. It was built in the 1950s, and this is the house here that we lived in. And then they kind of get newer and newer. Like this one was built in 87. We lived in that house. And then this one was 2004, and it's this one here. So all of my work deals with this idea of place and kind of digging up my own histories that I had maybe forgotten by living in the suburbs or experiencing this education system. But I decided that I would try to relate back to my past in the context of growing up on a farm and dealing with sheep. Like I was only there for the first 9 years of my life, but I started researching some of the things that my dad would do, and combining them with my more urban perspective and my interests with minimalism. So this I titled Urban Sheep. It's from 2010, so it's 24 inches wide, 36 inches long, and 40 inches high. And it's filled with all of the scraps of the sheep fleece. So after you shear the sheep, there's all of these bits that are from the underbelly, and they're kind of heavily soiled, and they're just discarded. There's no value in that, and there's no sense in trying to wash it out. It's just it's too much. So it's a really clean sculpture, but as soon as you got close to it, it had a very distinct smell of the farm. Like it would come right through the plexi. There was an opening in the bottom, so I was able to remove all of it and let it breathe. So I thought that the sheep kind of symbolized my childhood at that time. I was trying to grasp onto some sort of identity, where I fit in. So I'm going to jump from here to 2012. I've always been interested, I guess for the last several years I've been collecting found photography. So photographs from yard sales, estate sales, flea markets, online auctions, eBay. And I started to appropriate these images because they'd come to me, and I knew that they would have that they had some sort of history. But for me, they were mostly a blank slate, and I tried to relate them to my own life. I titled this Tom and Sonny at the Beach. It's 16, the whole thing together. There's 2 prints there. It's 16 by 48 inches. And I was thinking of these 2 male figures here as my dad's house that I grew up in. We had 2 neighbors on either side, Tom and Sonny, and they were quite attractive men. So I'd always kind of look at them. So the process is actually interesting. It's made with one transparency, but I'm using a reductive technique where I'm putting down a layer, and then I'm actually using wax crayon on the screen to reduce it, and then I do the next layer until there's enough depth. So I think each one has 7 or 8 layers. So similar to posterization, but in a manual form.
Mackenzie, what are the geometric forms that come across through those figures? It happens here at the bottom too.
So these ones are reflections. They turn into almost like rock forms, but it's actually the top of their heads. I tried to remove some of the female presence only because of my own sexuality. It didn't really interest me. I wanted to be about these 2 guys. I'm not that sounds really bad, but anyway.
It does sound bad.
Yeah. So this next one, it's done in the same way. And I titled this one Shepherd's Boy. So this is an image, a found image again, and I kind of related myself to the figure. And I wanted to express almost an uncertainty, and this idea of the Rorschach effect, splitting at the head. So some type of mental state of uncertainty in coming into boyhood or manhood. And I wanted these kind of salmon backgrounds to reference my sexuality in contrast to the figure. So from there, I was thinking about my siblings. I was trying to find a photograph that would represent me and my 2 brothers. So same process. I was trying to think of us in terms of our upbringings, how they were quite similar. But as a gay man, how did I relate to them, or what did I learn from them? And I wanted this kind of cloudscape to reference a mental state again. I was also reading a lot about on the subject of sexual orientation at the time, and there were some theories that it's determined between the age of 3 and 5, which was interesting to me. So that's 2012. And here I was also, sorry, it's a little blurry. I was thinking about having 2 brothers and our competitive nature, even just silly things like who's taller, who could run faster. That was always part of my childhood. We were always very competitive, but we would still somehow support each other. It's interesting because my oldest brother actually, a couple months ago, we had this intense conversation where he said that he wished he was the gay son, and that he would have, his own relationships would be more gender equal or neutral, which I thought was interesting. So from there, I know I titled this something, but I really can't remember. But it's 40 by 40 inches, and it's of the same series, screen print on canvas. But I was thinking about the home and creating some type of clock, or referencing a time in a way by that rotation of the same image. And also, I think this marks a point where I start to break away from doing any type of figurative work. At this time, I found that it was kind of, I had quite a bit of feedback, and people couldn't access it. They couldn't picture themselves within the work as well. They were more of an outsider. I need a sip of water.
And how big are these? How big is this one?
This one's 40 by 40 inches. So I would use one screen and I would piece things together, and I would try to strategically print sections. Like there's a line here, but then the line would rotate and start again here. So I think this was 2 transparencies and it went like something like that. And then these were all separate transparencies that I put together as a border. Just because screen print, sometimes you're limited by your screen size, and I wanted to make them somewhat big. They were also printed on boards that are stretched first and coated with clear gesso, and then I would remove them from the board and stretch them onto a frame. So the textures, you can't really tell here, but they become quite sculptural or topographical with all of the layers. So here's the next piece. It's titled Mundane Changes. I'm still trying to reference some of that mental state with the clouds, and the grass enters into the bottom here. And there's 10 boxes, half of which are 18 inches square and the other ones are 20. Similar thing going on with the home, referencing some type of circular movement. And then, the white picket fence. So all of these images are found and appropriated. So from this point, I was taking a lot of pictures of random houses that I would find in Toronto that expressed my feeling towards renovation, or the juxtaposition between the old and the new. So this house, did I say it's in the beaches area? It's in the beaches, Toronto. And it's fascinating that someone would commit all of this time and money to this side, even though it's attached to something that's completely in decay. But also the idea of history, like all that history has been wiped away. But there's still this odd reference to what that house was that I found really fascinating. So as I mentioned, like my childhood was pretty much, let's move to a fixer-upper that needs some cosmetic work, put some time and money in it, live in it for a few years, and then try to get maximum profit. So I've never really had, besides the farm, I never really had a childhood home. There was never, kind of above the foundation of the home, it was more or less a showroom. Everything was neutral. There weren't any family photos. Everything was tucked away. There was nothing really too exciting in terms of interior design. It was nice, but there weren't any personal touches. So I started thinking about that in a sense, and how I was living in all these neighborhoods, and I was actually running a lot, and I would peer into people's homes that had been there since the development started. It was interesting to see what was in their living room, or how things were decorated, or how the comfort of their home was more valuable than the appearance. So this piece, it's actually in this exhibition right now. I kind of tucked it away in the back. This references, well, I called it 6:24 p.m. So a nice evening time to go for a run. And it's the first piece that I made when I arrived here in Saskatoon. And it, I wanted it to represent that idea of voyeurism by looking into a place and having it like either the light shut off, or you have to wait there a minute and try to get another glimpse. So this piece, the light bulb fades in for 30 seconds, and then it shuts off for 10 seconds. So it's actually pretty impossible to see all 5 sides at once. So it forces you to wait there for a minute. This also kind of represents my interests in minimalism and my interests in mid-mod design, and how that's coming back, and how something that's 60 years old can become contemporary again. So here's a close-up of it. So the idea is similar to a stretch painting in a sense, like wooden frames, except there's 45-degree angles in all the corners. The canvas is printed on the inside, so when the box is off, all you see is canvas. It's printed with white ink in like a halftone. So at this point, I was actually becoming quite homesick, and it was the middle of winter, and I wanted to make a piece that was interactive, something that would bring my prints into a more sculptural realm. This piece is called To Confide In. So it's in a similar design to that previous light piece, and I made it right after it. And I'm fiddling with a lot of electronics at this time. I'm using Arduinos and things to randomly control the light. I found that really frustrating but fun at the same time. So here's the image of the inside. It's a print that's lit from behind with LEDs. So that button that's on that side needs to be pressed in order for these people to experience this. But at the same time, the computer controlling this is randomly shutting this on and off. So hopefully those people would turn around and ask that person, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Accuse them of something. But I wanted a motherly figure in here. The other element, I wanted some type of breeze, or the idea of breath to come into this piece. So when it's turned on, there's actually a fan down here that blows air up and back through this slot at your eyes. And it makes a funny buzzing sound, so it's not really natural. So at this point, I was spending a lot of time crafting all of these objects, and I felt like no one could see me or see the work in it, or they thought that I just produced it in like a week. It wasn't like that. So I was thinking of the idea of self-surveillance, some way of tracking my progress. So this is actually I would take video of myself with a homemade fisheye lens. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And these are all video stills, and you see there's a little bit of light leakage going on in each still. So the size of these, that first one in the previous slide was 30 by 48. This one's 24 by 48 and then 36 by 36. And they're digital prints on matte paper. They're quite velvety. So the video piece, if you want to look at it, it's on Vimeo, titled A Circular Task, and it's also on my website. So this was the homemade fisheye lens that I used. So it's actually like a door peephole, a little bit of plumbing pipe, some foam, and electrical tape. And it just fits right over a little point and shoot camera that I have that takes HD video. So it just slides over and then you kind of MacGyver it on or tape it with duct tape. So that's what created this fisheye effect, rather than a program. So from that point, I've always been interested in trying to make my prints sculptural. I feel like the process of layering all of these pigments is a very sculptural one, in the sculptural mindset. So I was trying to create three-dimensional forms that would contrast something more flat. So these darker areas, but also referencing structure, control, the idea of multiples. I wanted this design to reference like some type of home or plot. This piece was mostly an experiment to see if I could work with a highly designed background, seeing if I could compete with it in some way. So from there, I was thinking about the houses that I grew up in and where I had the most freedom. So I decided to make, with a 3D printer and a fairly crude program called Tinkercad, a series of foundations of all the homes that I've lived in. So just pretty much the basement. It's actually quite interesting, but in Ontario, in the housing market, it was more desirable to have an unfinished basement. A lot of basement renos aren't really that fantastic to begin with. So it's interesting if it's apparently more appealing if a family comes into a home if the basement's unfinished. You know, there's room for them to grow. There's also unlimited storage in the meantime. But it was also a place, since they were so unfinished, that I was able to, you know, make a mess, do whatever I wanted, and not worry about deteriorating the value or messing up anything on the upper levels. So here's a detail. So there's little miniature stairs in each. I don't know if you can see. This one's kind of a side split. This one, I think, oh yeah, you walk down and over or something.
So these are all just the basements?
They're all just the basements. Because of the 3D program, I had to find some way of making the areas that wouldn't have basements, like the garage areas. There's rarely a basement under there, maybe a cold cellar sometimes. I had to somehow make them lighter, so the best thing was these pillars. I'm not sure how effective that is, but it's different. So here's a close-up. They go in chronological order from left to right. So this is the farmhouse that I grew up in. I wanted to reference some type of stone foundation. Something really, they are quite simple, like the staircases are in the middle. Yeah, so maybe I can go right here. So this was the farmhouse. That's Van Ness Road, Parnell Crescent, Pine Brook, Fernhill Boulevard, which is here, Bessborough, John Walter Crescent, Halstead Road, Baseline Road, and Minsky Place. Those are the names of all of the streets. So I've always been interested. Well, since I arrived here and I was able to work with John Back a little bit, I've been interested in 3D printing. I was able to take a trip to Chicago in the summer, and I went to this pop-up shop called the 3D Print Experience. And my partner and I had our upper torsos scanned and printed, and they're 2.5 inches high. I think they're kind of cute. But I look like Tintin. But you can get them printed up to like 4.5 at this place. And the actual mechanism, they used an Xbox Kinect and like a rotating table, and they were able to scan us. It took 1 minute to scan us. The longest part was just waiting for the prints. So this piece, you saw a little earlier in that circular task in terms of me documenting what I was making, and I was making this. So there's 280 grass boxes here that are all hand screen printed. And I wanted to create some type of installation that would reference the lawn or the backyard and how it's idealized in suburban living. So there's a sound piece that's part of this installation, and there's little motion detectors here and here that were run by an Arduino that was in one of these boxes. So an Arduino is like a little mini processor, like a mini computer, that you can use code to control the volume or the sound. And the motion detectors were directly linked into that. So I wanted to create a place where you could sit and relax and enjoy, like picture yourself enjoying the view of your wooden fence and being close to your neighbor, but still divided in a way. So that's why the chairs are in separate spaces. So the soundtrack includes birds, cars, people talking, but it's all kind of overrun by the roar of a lawnmower that's hitting twigs and stones. This was in the gallery in the summer as part of the Finding City project with Adrian Stimson. So the lawn chairs are actually brand new, but they're recreations of, vintage design. So there's a detail. I folded the tops to create some type of variation, to give some type of shadow, similar to what grass would do, in a very controlled manner. It was printed in 3 parts, so there's quite a bit of variation. Some of them are a little more crisp, others are more vibrant, more yellow. And at this time, I started to realize that my entire view of nature, my upbringing, it was very disconnected from the earth. It was all about control. It was all about the aesthetic. And it wasn't really about nature at all. So here's another detail. So I started looking at some of the suburbs that surround the city here, and I found a lot of them had fences, a lot of them were gated communities, and there was also, they were quite diverse in terms of architecture or different forms of houses. So there would be a type of row house, then there would be a gated community, and then there would be single family homes all within one suburban development, which is something that I'm not really familiar with coming from Ontario. Here's a close-up. So this, I removed the sky in each of these so there'd be more emphasis on the actual structures, and I finished them in a CMYK process. But at this point I started to realize that I had no connection to this anymore. I was an outsider. I was no longer, like I grew up in the suburbs, but I was no longer in my present living situation. And I started thinking about the dichotomy of the insider and the outsider. And I started looking at what my family looked for when buying a house to flip. What was considered, what were the materials that were used to make a house prestigious, and one of them was, a red brick home and a fully bricked house. So there are a lot of houses in Ontario where, like, brick is quite common there, and like here there's a lot of siding. But they'll just brick the front of the house and then maybe 2/3 of the side. But it's quite desirable to have that brick wrap all the way around. So I was thinking of that in terms of just materials, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with them, but I decided that I would make 300. Yeah, which was I don't know about that choice. Let's see. If you have any questions, feel free to ask whenever. So this is a 5-color print. So once they were all printed, I started folding them, and I realized that they need to create some type of structure. My original idea was to stack them on a pallet, similar to what you would find in like a new development, something that would go quite high and would be unstable in a way. But as I said, as soon as I folded them, it just wasn't working. I had the pallet built, and it just, wasn't working at all. So they're all hand scored and folded, all 300 of them. And then each time I come into my studio, I try to install things in a different way. And I've started to realize that this installation needs more elements. It needs more bricks. My goal is to have 600 of them and 4 different types of bricks. So something that would be more of a concrete, something that would be a half brick, something that would be flatter, maybe like a yellowy or green brick. And this installation, it's still in progress, but it will be ready for my thesis exhibition this fall. So you can look forward to that. So back, in terms of the palette piece, it wasn't really working with my ideas of bringing printmaking off the wall. It represented, a minimalist object that was quite precious that people would walk around, and it wouldn't really create an experience. So my goal is to create some type of experience with this installation. And I see it working between kind of the architecture in the gallery, starting off with something quite formal and breaking down and turning into something that's more organic or broken. So I'm trying to, like, I grew up in all these constructions of, like, social constructions of what what living is, where I should live, how I should maintain my property. But I see these as kind of explorations into those materials and ideas of thinking, and I want to possibly unlearn and relearn different ways of living.
Mackenzie, I have a question.
Yeah.
In talking to you in your studio, we talked a tiny bit about simulation and these kinds of materials, and it makes me want to ask the question about nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And how nostalgia fits into your work, because to me it sounds like you speak of nostalgia, the idyllic, and maybe how you've been confronted with generic
Mm-hmm.
in your lifetime. And could you talk a little bit about the notion of nostalgia and also simulation?
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely a sense of nostalgia. I'm trying to look back upon these things from an adult perspective, like look on the landscape of my childhood and try to reference it in a more contemporary sense. But there's definitely that idea. I don't quite want any of these objects to be neutral or mundane. I want them to be a faux finish, some type of facade. something that would be hyper real. Something to bring more attention to the materials. And hopefully, like with this wall piece, I'm hoping to represent some type of change, but also like the breaking of an emotional wall. But I would also like it to reference the idea of the superficial or the appearance. Like in a suburb, you use these walls to hide any of your family problems, or to hide what your family's really like. So it's interesting. And I don't really see that as a negative thing anymore. I see it as more of an exploration. But I realized that my childhood and where like the materials and the ways of living, they were all sourced from multiple locations and not just one home.
You know, one thing that strikes me is when you're making these little these grass boxes, or you're making your simulated bricks, that they're really about being very far removed from the original source. You know, both the material, both in the kind of fact that they're manufactured through kind of printmaking, the fact that they can't be functional. And I wondered if you've ever kind of thought about actually taking these materials that you make, the bricks and the grass, and actually making your ideal dream home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you kind of look at the suburbs as kind of the critical take, but there's also a certain bond of affection that goes along with that. So I just wonder, have you ever thought about, you know, rather than kind of
I don't
being
think
so
I know.
removed?
I don't think I know what I want yet.
Okay.
I'm at a place where I'll soon be finished school. My partner is in Denver. My parents are in Ontario. There's many options for how I could live. And I want to see this as an exploration of some of my values that I grew up with. I also find that the distance here, like being 3,000 kilometers away from my family, it's much easier for me to work through these ideas without being criticized.
But have you thought about taking the materials you make and actually making a simulated home?
I have thought about that, but I think I would need multiple homes. I don't think I could just have one home.
Couldn't stop at one.
No, because it would reference that idea of, you know, the family home that's, you know, full of my siblings and like our portraits and our awards and whatever else my parents have collected.
Can I add to that? I'm way at the back.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that, like, what would happen then if you weren't necessarily going to build a home, that you're going to pick up certain items that you feel are signifiers of that idealism, but at the same time have a few home objects that are more stable,
Mm-hmm.
that are more solid and less fragile and less disposable. And what are those things
Mm-hmm.
that aren't disposable? And it's just a thought, a possibility, that visual contrast between things that can be broken, thrown away, and things that are more solid.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. I am representing fragments right now. I'm very, I feel like I need to make everything by hand just based on my work ethic and creating something that I'll take pride in. If it was digital, I don't think I would.
But perhaps those materials, for the more solid ones,
Mhm.
are made by you, but they're of material that's not disposable. It's
Mhm.
heavier, maybe it's metal.
I was thinking to add on to that, like
Yeah.
the hardware store has your toolbox and you've got choices, siding. You could do, you know, the same ideas that you have with your pattern making. You could have like, you know, just similar to the piece that you did in here where it's about your playground, it's about your home, it's the gallery. And you could get siding, you could do like a wall in the design, you can do anything. And then you talked about the next shapes that you're using that are more gemological. it's like you're coring something, you're trying to, find something.
Mm-hmm.
There's that aspect of the phenomenological, like the gaze and phenomena, where you get a glimpse of something very brief, the window into. So there's a reference to that in the screen images on white.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I have been playing with a little, like, I am putting some objects into the actual ball, possibly mirrors. They will represent windows or different types of windows. Or I was thinking they're all made of cardboard, or a door that just can't open.
Rachel Whiteread's new work is, have you seen it?
I've seen a little bit of it, yeah.
Her new work is, she's just opening up the boxes, so the way you have your boxes, she just takes any box that she finds and she opens it up as a drawing. And she puts it on the wall and she so relieves it because all of her work references this inside of a space.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's not the same content, but the idea of the box can be, you're working with a lot of ideas here.
Yeah.
And the garden you talked about as well, but you're not now, so I'm curious how you're thinking about the garden,
Mm-hmm.
because that is just an endless topic of development.
It is. Yeah, I don't really see my pieces ever having a completely solid idea.
Well, that's okay, but so
yeah.
how are you looking at the garden right now as very different from a lot of the other things that you've done in the past, and you're looking at nature? You talked a little bit about that connection to, or disconnection.
Yes.
So how do you see it now evolving in just the idea of the garden?
I still see my view as being very disconnected. It's a very colonial view, and a lot of it comes from my upbringing, and I would like to start to break that down. But I see these objects as being, having a greater focus on the shape and the control rather than the plant. With a lot of the homes that I moved into, the first thing was, let's redo the facade of the house. Let's change the brick so it's more contemporary. Let's bring the landscapers in and make like a romantic design of interlocking and retaining walls. Something that is very controlled. And all of the plants, the idea is to kind of control their shape. And I'm hoping to pick plants that represent that. Plants that can be heavily shaped. Here's a detail. Like this, I was referencing boxwood. So this, I see it is still in its beginning stages. I have 12 plants. I'm hoping to have 30. I'm going to add height to it. I also want them to sit on something, like maybe printed beach stone, something that will create a path. So again, all of this is hand printed on rice paper and pasted, and they're on cardboard structures.
Can you remind me of rice gardens and stone, where they place the big rocks?
The Japanese
On
garden.
the sand? Be situated on sand floor,
Mm-hmm.
like colored sand. You can pick any color of sand to use. It's easy to use.
What did I have to say about this? Oh, so generally I find I really love labor, and I find that process to be more therapeutic than the end result. Like the end result can be quite stressful sometimes, but just the process of making is really, really important to me. But it's just something else I need to add. So I'm trying to play with some of the colors, how the color will, like how that purple is pushing backwards or back, and the yellow is coming forward, and how that will interfere with the geometry of the shape. And that is my last slide.
One last question.
Yeah,
Are you thinking about shadows? Are there shadows in some?
I am thinking about
some of this
shadows,
foliage?
and I'm thinking about depth in a way. I don't know if you saw here, but I added, I'm adding some darkness to the bottom of these to interrupt the shape itself and have them sit off the floor. So there's like a dark forest green and a black. I want this to interfere a little more than it is right now. I'm still playing with that. But I think lighting will be really important for this piece and how that shadow is cast.
You talked about how walls work in the suburbs, how brick walls work to looking out. Are you thinking about, you think that, like how brick walls or how walls work generally, do you think that there's seepage in how a wall works? Like psychologically, do you think that there's a possibility representing that? If you think that there is that? And do you think it's very distinctive, like from how separation and partitioning works in an urban context? Because that's your context now.
Yeah, I think it is quite different. You make sacrifices in both places, but I feel like right now I have a greater sacrifice living in an urban environment, dealing with noise. There's a lot of noise of people above or around you. I kind of see the wall as keeping people out or strategically letting people in. It's how I see my personality as well. Like I love my alone time. I'm very much an introvert. So that's where I get my energy. I see the wall in that kind of perspective.
I'm just thinking it might be interesting to try to represent the failure of those borders. And then it might be
Mm-hmm. I think that could be referenced in that piece, in the brick piece, as it starts to break down and collapse. I hope I answered your
Richard
question.
Serra talks about that when he's asking you to walk into the corners of something where the architecture and the sculpture become psychological space that's not generally occupied. And so we walk into it trying to discover the space itself, which also references your notion of coming and going and everything being new. Like there's many ways for you to set it up that will give you different things.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. I also would challenge the idea of the print too, in the structure of taking it back or the conceptual part and then switching it back into a three-dimensional object.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that if you just took 300 sheets of that image and created columns in the room with it, it could be crazy,
Mm-hmm.
unexpected.
Yeah, I kind of see printmaking as that medium that I can really focus in on and perfect, and then sculpture gives me the outlet for a little more exploration. But that would be interesting to challenge me with that. So I know my printmaking is a type of security blanket in a way. I know that it gives me hope for the future in terms of jobs. It's something that's very technical and something that not everyone can teach. And I think that's why I hold on to it.
Well, I think it's good because you obviously have the skill to use it to any direction that you want. And so it's pretty versatile. Warhol's big images and everything with the screen printing and the reference to the history of the screen printing is very much also occupied in your work from your standpoint. And that could be referenced as well, history. Sigmar Polk, he has this huge resin images where the images created from behind and then the pools, similar to the large, so many people think.
Because you made me think about, last summer I went to Kuchto's house in a little village.
Okay.
And his house is really quite eccentric. And he loves leopard skin. And every surface of his room, his bedroom, is covered in, even the ceiling is a kind of leopard skin. And I'm thinking about the symbolic nature of some of your plants and how they, I think you're speaking about them in an interesting metaphorical way. And thinking about you fragmenting areas of a home, and whether it be an amalgamation, I like the way this is going. I think that you could really do something that's very, it's very stage-like. But I like the idea of building it to see what it feels like to be in the experiential part of it.
Yeah, I definitely want that to be a strong factor. And I'm hoping that that can be created without a lot of electronics or sound or lights. Hoping that it can be created in a more raw form.
Visual form.
A visual
Absolutely.
form.
Yeah. Pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question jumping back.
Yeah.
The 2 years found images, like especially the one with the 3 children that's supposed to be you and your brother. Is there like a reason that you don't use actual photos of yourself and your family?
Well, with a lot of family photos, there's so much baggage attached, right? Like, I don't think you can really see it in its true form, and that's how I see things. It just, as soon as there's a family photo, there's this immense sense of personal nostalgia, but also in terms of like my own family, there would be this immediate attachment to whatever it is. And I don't want to make art for the home anymore. I don't want to make something that's going to hang above someone's sofa. I want to make something that's an experience. And I just feel like if I used personal photography, it would just, I don't know, it would be up, like, they would just be distributed to all my family members. Yeah, they become too precious.